Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for episode 10 of This Game Where's Building Chester Zoo series. We are doing things slightly differently today. I'll get into that in a moment, but before we get stuck into everything, I just wanted to let everybody know that we'll be doing a charity live stream on Twitch and YouTube on Saturday the 13th of June. The live stream is to raise money for Chester Zoo, who have announced that they are struggling somewhat financially due to the COVID-19 situation. They've had to be closed for some time now, and they are looking at the possibility of closure should they fail to raise the money that they need. And the money that they need is substantial. It's £1.6 million per month. Now, I'm not expecting to raise that single-handedly. A lot of people are already doing a lot of good things, and I wanted to just do my part, and I imagine it'll be quite a small part, but you can make it that little bit bigger by joining me on Saturday, donating to the cause. I've set up a Just Giving page. The link is live now, so if you wanted to donate, the details will be in the description. But I'll be streaming for 12 hours from 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night, and I'd love it if you joined me. I'm going to need people to talk to because I'm just not very good at sitting and talking to myself. So please come and join me. Make it a fun time. I've also got some things to give away. So a few gaming related things. 3 copies of the Arctic DLC for Planet Zoo as one thing that I'll be giving away, obviously, or 3 things that I'll be giving away. That was actually donated very kindly by Frontier to help with the effort. So thank you so much to Frontier, and hopefully it'll help us raise that little bit extra for Chester Zoo. So yeah, please do come and join us. All of the details will be in the description. The best thing to do is to follow me on here, subscribe here, or on Instagram, details in the description, or on Twitch itself, again, details in the description. So now that I've said that, let's get stuck into the video. The video is slightly different. I've done 2 things this week. Rather than doing a major project like I usually do, focusing on a single enclosure or exhibit, I have actually done a smaller exhibit in the CAMELS, which is fairly straightforward. If you've ever been to Chester, you'll know that. But I've also gone back and touched up a few little bits that I've already done in the past. So the first thing that I'm going to do is walk you through those little extra touches that I've done. Largely, they centre around this area, the entrance plaza. So the first thing that you might notice is that I've created my own Chester Zoo sign, and that is up on top of the entrance here. I think I've done quite a good job, actually. It's a replica, a reimagining within the Planet Zoo game of the actual sign, and I've got pretty close with what I had available to me. I've also added the numbers, the years to the gates. So I had signs on here, and that was because when I built this was the first thing that I built, this entrance plaza. It took me a long time because I was learning how to do everything while I was doing it, and I didn't realise that they had this large alphabet or set of numbers as well in the game. So I've replaced those. They look a lot better already. I've added the planters. So there are planters in the entrance plaza, and this is the first one. I've had to go with what I fancied doing in the bottom of it, but there is a large tree in this, benches around it. These aren't usable benches, but they look like benches, so I'm happy with that. The planting down here is completely made up, but I've sort of done a bullseye with the flowers, is what I was thinking, and I think it looks quite nice. Then there's these planters over here that use mud hut. Is it mud hut or mud pieces for the wall pieces for the surrounds, and then a bit of mulch on the top, and then planted up with different plants in each one. Also a slightly larger version of it here, which again is modelled on what's actually in the zoo, with something that I'm quite pleased with. It's an information board. So the lettering here is the Gisilrus lettering that I used earlier on in an earlier video. I think it was for up here? I had guest services up here, and I've used those again, and actually they've come out really good. I need to do a bit of an adjustment on that eye though, don't I? Just to make it look like an eye. On this board, on the information board itself, this is actually mostly guttering, would you believe? So guttering, my favourite piece in the game is one of the guttering pieces. I used it in the Spirit of the Jaguar as a hook, and I've used it here to create sort of these lines that are supposed to be, obviously they don't look like writing, but if you think about how a cartoon might render a newspaper. That's what I was going for with this. So we've got like a couple of information posters, and then we've got what is supposed to be a map of the zoo. So I think I probably could have done this to look a little bit more like the shape of the zoo, but I'm quite happy with the way it's turned out. I hope you agree that I've done a reasonable job of it. The other major addition is this area. So I've fixed up this area. This is the Zoo Mobility building, and I had it set up. I had the outline of it set up, but I've actually now completed the building. The interior is empty. It's just a shell of a building. So I could possibly populate the insides a little bit more, but at the same time I have added and created, in fact, this locker piece, and use that to populate the insides, because that is actually what is in there. And the lockers are available on the workshop, as is the information board, this information board. If there's anything else that you would like adding to the workshop that I haven't put on there that you can't find on our workshop, please do drop me a comment or something like that to let me know what it is, and I'll do my best to get it on if I can. So that was the additions to our entrance area. And now for what I suppose is the main event, which is the Camel Enclosure, the camels and the onagers. We don't have onagers in the game, but they are, for anyone that doesn't know, they're sort of a donkey-like, zebra-like creature, hooved animal. If you've ever seen them, either in the zoo or on the Chester Zoo television programme Secret Life of the Zoo, which shows on Channel 4 in the UK, they are quite rambunctious creatures and tend to do a lot of kicking and other lively activities, if you catch my drift. We don't have them in the game, unfortunately, but if they get added, I will certainly add them to here. We do have camels, so you can see a little camel here. Because it's quite a simple enclosure, what I'm going to do with this video is something slightly different. So I'm going to try and talk you through as best as I can the process that I follow for making these enclosures. I think from what I've worked out, it's about 8 separate distinct steps. It might have smaller steps within those larger steps, but I have broken it down into 8 different sections of the build. So hopefully this will give you a better idea of how I build, and maybe if you're trying to get into doing the building yourself as well, then you'll be able to follow these steps and see if they work for you. They might not, but they might. So we'll see. The first thing that I do then is using usually Google Maps. Or Google Earth. Actually, I've moved on to Google Earth, which has got some really good tools to help you, including a timeline that you can look at the maps from above at different times throughout the last sort of 20 years, which is great. I take measurements for the entire area that I'm working on. So in this case, I took measurements from here down to here, and then across here, and then because it widens out a little bit, I took another measurement here. I took the measurement down the back as best as I could, and I took the measurement from about here in a straight line down. So took all of those measurements so that I knew what sort of area I was working with. I then also took measurements of the building and, importantly, the footpad, the concrete pad that this stands on. The fence runs along the edge of the pad, and it was important to get that right. So I get that all measured out, and then I paint the ground with usually sand, because sand tends to make things stand out in this game, and it's easier to sort of place things on top of sand. In this case, it is actually a sand enclosure, so that worked out perfectly, wonderfully actually. Just didn't have to do any changes afterwards, pretty much. But then once I've done that, I lay out the perimeter. So the perimeter fence, I use a barrier, either electric fencing or the chain link fence. In this case, it was the chain link fence, because it does actually use chain link fence along the back edge here. And I get all of the measurements as close as I can to what I've captured on Google Earth. And then if the fence is sort of a different style to the actual barrier that I've put down, which in most cases it is, once that is in place, I will start to think about how I'm going to create the realistic look, or the closest to realistic I can get with the tools that I've got. So usually that entails, in the case of the elephants, we had quite an intricate fence. I'll take you over there and show you the fence that we had there for anyone that missed that video. So if you look at that, that looks quite strange. In fact, I'm going to bring one up and out so that you can see. That is a fence with God knows how many pieces. Let's have a look how many pieces that's got. So 50 pieces, nearly 49 pieces for that single piece of fence. So the entire section, the entire perimeter of that enclosure is probably quite a few hundred pieces, if not a thousand or more. Whereas this one is a dry stone wall fence, and so that entire section of about 12 meters of fence is only 4 pieces, and that could have been even simpler if I hadn't put the topper on. So this is actually the dry stone wall top and the dry stone wall together here. So it depends on what you're trying to create as to what you actually have to use, but in this case it was dry stone wall, nice and simple. So we've now got our barriers in, we've got our dry stone wall in place, and that is what I would say the perimeter of the enclosure, and therefore that job is job number 1. We've got the perimeter in place, done all of our measurements, got it as accurate as possible, and we know what sort of area we're working with. The second thing then, the second step in my process, is to figure out the layout. So if we take you up above the enclosure, what you see if you look at this area on Google Earth is that we've got some hilling here, we've got the building over here, we've got this stonework here which also separates off this sort of tiny grassed area. No idea why this is separated, and we also see things like the pathing, so we see the shape of the pathing. So there's a few things that we're taking in. Oh, and also planting, so where plants are in the enclosure in a general sense and around the edges of the enclosure. So we take a look at that, we map it out as best we can with whatever tools we can. In this case, for the camels, it was a case of creating the concrete pad the size that we needed it, and then placing it at the right angle for us to work on, and just recolouring this area here to show the general area, the general size of this creation, this corner. Oh yeah, also getting these for sort of the general area of where these are. So that's step 2, that's the layout. We then move on to our next step, and in this case for me, it's usually building any buildings, so the shell of the building in particular. So this was more pertinent for something like our Spirit of the Jaguar, where the shell is quite complex anyway in and of itself, and then inside is quite complex and has a lot of features and details as well that visitors actually see. So it was really important to get that shell correct, and then to be able to work our way round the inside. For the camels, it was quite a simple building, which was a nice change of pace. It's a rectangular building, but looking at it from above, if you just look at it from Google Earth, you just see this rectangle, and you get a sense of obviously the shape, but also the colours of the roof, but you can't see what's going on underneath. So you have to sort of find some more images if you can. So a good reference for those is Secret Life of the Zoo, if you have that access to that in any way. Also, you can go to Google Street View and you can have a look at this building from there. So that's what I was doing for the most part. The view that you're looking at it from, though, is from over here. So you have to zoom in as best as you can on Google Street View from here, and then also this was probably the next best view on Google Street View for me. I was able to get the detail of the building from those two views, and I was able to see that there's this overhang, that there are these three doors, and that there was the fence with the gates on each of these parts. So that's the third step. So figuring out what the building actually is supposed to look like, making sure that you get as close to accurate as possible, and then building it. So you can do that. I think this is unnecessary, but I tend to try and keep my buildings all in one piece if I can, but as much as I can. And I'll start with the walls. I'll get the shape of the base of the walls done, and then I'll start to build up from there. So getting this sort of shape, I'll build on top of the base of the walls, and then roof goes on top, and then usually I do fiddling around for anything like windows in the top. The last thing that I do is create the openings, so any doorways or windows, and then detailing. And again, in this case, detailing was putting these in, the columns and the trim around the top of the walls or base of the roof. So this trim along here is, well, I've managed to do it as part of the building, but usually you have to separate it off if you're going to do it. So yeah, that's the step for building the buildings on the inside, because I don't know what's actually going on in here. I need to try and find that out. It's bare for now, but if you were going to be doing more to the interior of that building, then that would be the point at which you do that. So build the shell and then go inside, do what you need to do inside. I haven't had to do anything like that in this build, so that is kind of a blessing in this case. The next thing that I would do is fine tuning. So I'll have a look again at my reference images, and I'll make sure that everything is in its right place, make sure that the fence is running inside its shell. So just if again I delete this, you can see that the barrier is actually still there, but I've overlaid the wall on top of it so that you can't actually see it for the most part. There is, I think, a little bit of fence over here. Oh no, I've managed to get it in. So if there was I'd go round and I'd have a little look at all of the areas where the fence is supposed to be buried inside, and I'd make sure that it is buried inside, that you can't see it anywhere. So go along the entire perimeter and do that. And if there's anything else niggly like that, so if my fence that I've built here, if the tops are all a little bit too uniform and I don't really like it, then I might go along and change those a little bit up so that I've got a less uniform fence, a little bit more man-made a more man-made fence. And that's what I call fine tuning. So making sure that everything is the way that I want it to be, making sure that everything is meeting up where I want it to be. That would be step 4. And then step 5 is the planting and the landscaping. So I said that there was a little hillock in the middle, that I would probably do that first, make sure that I get that in the right place. And in this case, I think I've done a reasonable job of doing that. You have to smooth it out after you've built it up and get it to the right sort of size. And then it's planting. So planting in this case was one tree in the enclosure itself, but we also had these planters here that are inside the enclosure that I had to build into the side of the wall. And then the main bulk of the planting was at the back here. So this is Flag Lane for anyone that hasn't seen our videos or been to the zoo. This is a bridleway that runs through the centre of the zoo, and they have the two bridges that go over the top of it. But Flag Lane is planted up at the back here. It has an exterior fence that runs along the edge of Flag Lane, and then there's like the barrier, the boundary, the planting boundary, and then there's the interior of our enclosure. So I would plant the inside of the enclosure, and then any exterior planting that is around the edge of the enclosure that sort of makes up a boundary, I would do that next. So that is step 5, planting and landscaping. It can be a bigger or smaller job depending on what you've got to do. So over here, the enclosures were for the Jaguar is sort of, I've dropped it right down and had to do some real heavy duty smoothing out and landscaping in there, and planting as well took a lot longer over there than it did here, because this is just a strip along the back, three trees down here, a bit of bushy work, and then these planters here. That is step 5. Then step 6, detailing of the exterior. So in this case it was again quite simple. It was just putting in this fence. If there are any secondary fences, as there often are, there's usually a boundary for the animals and a boundary on the outside of that for the visitors to keep them well separated. And in this case it was putting in this here, and also there's things like this. So this is flooring. We've got the path here, and then we've got some flooring overlaid on it. Again, if I just let's choose, I'll tell you what, I'll take it all out. If I just take all of that out, that is our path. So we can get actually visitors into this section here, but it doesn't look particularly nice. And so I've laid over some flooring here so that it looks a bit, well, I think a bit better. And actually, you might think that looks a bit messy, but if you go and have a look at the zoo, that is what the zoo is like. The reality of pavements in zoos or in any walk of life, pun not intended, is that they tend to be patched up and changed on the fly as people make different changes over time, and actually this zoo is no different, and the path has light colours, dark patches and whatnot. So that is part of my sort of detailing on the exterior, or after the enclosure's been built. You go around, you look at the fences, you look at the flooring, and you put in the details around there. And in this case there was this panel here. This is a cheetah, so the cheetahs are down here in the real zoo. This is usually a cheetah sign, but I don't have any cheetah signage that works in the game, so I've done it as a cougar, not a cougar, a jaguar, blooming heck. So yeah, done it as a jaguar with this leaf motif. The last thing that I do is a double check of the surrounding area. So in my double check of this area, I decided that I was going to do this planter here. It's quite a large planter, and it's not really attached to anything. So I sort of look, well, what do I need to do in the general area around this enclosure that might not get done in other builds, and this is one of them. I didn't do, you might know that there's like a round building here and a picnic area. I didn't do that on this build because it's actually a viewing area for the cheetahs, or for what I think is still the cheetahs over here. So that'll be part of the cheetah build. Whereas this planter here and this planter here, because they're in sort of a bit of a no man's land between two different areas, the battery and camels, and then this is actually the dormouse garden, I found out, but like it's not really part of any enclosure in particular. So I attach them myself to the camels, because if you don't do that, you end up missing bits, and that is something that I've learned over time. That's the reason I've had to go back to the entrance plaza and sort of do a few touch-ups that I really wanted to do, but never felt like I had the chance or time to do. The other thing that I noticed was necessary that I'd missed is this small detail on the side of the bridge. So it's something that I'd built the bridge, and I knew that these details were here, the window and this doorway, but I wasn't getting back round to doing them. So that was, and that is the resident Chester Zoo ghost. I don't know if you know about him, but you should check the Wikipedia page on him. He's an interesting character. Yeah, I was never getting back around to doing them, but I've used this opportunity because it's in close proximity to our camels enclosure. I've used this opportunity to go back and do that as well. And that is it, really. That is my process. So just to summarise, we've got the perimeter. Get the perimeter right. Take the measurements from your reference photos, usually on Google. Get that all set out, and then look at number 2, the layout of the. There is 1A, the pathing as well, so pop the pathing in round the perimeter. And then number 2, the layout of the enclosure, make sure everything's in the right place, build out sections, so like the concrete pad for our camels in this case, make sure the buildings are in the right place and whatnot before you actually start building them. 3, build the shells of the buildings, and then if you have any major work to do on the inside, to do the inside. Then, number 4, fine tuning, so go around everything that you built, make sure that everything's lined up, so roof parts are lined up nicely with wall parts, that windows aren't overlapping with roof pieces or something, or anything like that, that the perimeter, the barrier is inside the wall if you want it to be inside a wall piece, that sort of thing, making sure that just everything is the way that you want it to be. Number 5, after that is the planting. So the planting is done then. I didn't say why it was done then, actually. The fine tuning, going around looking at the barrier, if you've got planting that overlaps the barriers or is snug up against a building, that would make the fine tuning a little bit more difficult, because you'd have to be working around that planting and sort of getting into a tree in order to have a look at the corners of a building or whatnot. So do the planting after you've fine tuned. Number 6 is the detailing, so anything that you haven't added, particularly around the edges, so like the secondary fences is always part of my detailing. If you think that your colours are not quite right, then that might be something that you look at there as well. Number 7 and final piece is the surrounding area. So are there any elements around this enclosure that you think you might miss if you don't do them now, is basically what you're asking yourself for that final step. And that should get you towards building enclosures and also a coherent zoo, in my view. It will make sure that you are not just focusing on the enclosures, but the actual cohesion of enclosure to enclosure and the spaces between your enclosures as well. So yeah, thank you ever so much for sticking with me. If you're still with us, if you are still with us, then you might actually like our videos, and so we would love you to subscribe, and maybe even you could bang the bell, because that will make sure that you get to watch those videos that we put out in the future. We do also have lots of videos that we've already made that you can watch on our channel, so go give those a look. They should be coming up about now, and we will see you again hopefully next Saturday on the 13th of June, 8 till 8 on Twitch and YouTube, but also for episode 11, probably the week after our charity live stream. So yeah, thank you ever so much for joining us, and I'll see you again soon.